Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American historian, Alan Searcy. Glad you guys are here with me. Hey, hope you guys survived all the snow and all the ice. Middle Tennessee got hit pretty hard. I think schools here didn't go, in Sumner County anyway, outside of Nashville, school was out for, 10 days? That's bananas. And I think even some parents still complaining because they still had ice. But yeah, Tennessee, we're not really prepared for this cold weather. I think even like New York City had a hard time too, and they're kind of used to things as well. But anyway, hey, make sure you guys are following Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook, Instagram. I wrapped up the big book giveaway. I'm going to announce some winners here, I think probably next week. But yeah, appreciate you guys. And also on the Facebook and Instagram, send me some questions. I'm going to do a Q&A here probably in 2 weeks. I love answering questions, and it's one of my favorite things to do. Actually, I'm going to kind of roll the punches here. The past couple of weeks, I had someone ask me, hey, tell me a story about going to a haunted place, or what's the most haunted place you've been in. So I'm kind of keeping with that because there's so many. I've been, over 1,000 places. So let's see here. The last show I talked about the Childress House in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So I was thinking about this the other day, the Lodes House in Franklin, Kentucky. So you guys know the Civil War, the Battle of Franklin. It was one of the bloodiest affairs in the war between the states. So after the battle took place, you got to think, if you're familiar with the geography of the area, Columbia Pike, a little bit south of Franklin, was pretty much ground zero. So after the battle was over, they fought all along Columbia Pike. Well, the Lodes House, which is right across the street from the Carter House is basically ground zero. It's where the battle started. So over across the street, the Lodes House, it was also, as soon as the fighting was over, it became a hospital. So, men from both sides passed away. I was part of an investigation one night. A buddy of mine rented the Lodes House. So probably about 8, 9, 10 o'clock, I'm in the Lodes House. There were some people upstairs. There was me and one other person downstairs. And someone walked downstairs, and it was them and I think their cousin. And they walked out the door. They wanted to go smoke. So I'm downstairs in the music room, which is on the back side of the house, and I hear this loud noise. It sounded like someone threw a brick and hit the side of the house. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe the guys who went outside to smoke, what happened was they slammed their car. That's what caused the noise. And I'm trying to debunk everything I can. So I go outside and I find the guys smoking. I said, hey, did you guys hear anything? And they said, no. I said, well, did you guys slam your door? Did you get some cigarettes, just close the door? No, we didn't go into our car. So I go back inside. I found the lady who was also downstairs, and I said, did you hear something? And she's like, yeah, it sounded like a bowling ball hit the side of the house. I'm like, okay, well, we heard the same thing then. So I talked to a staff member, I guess, a few days later, and they told me, it's one of those things. He showed me videos of mini balls rolling across the floor. Weird things just happen in that place. I've seen pictures of soldiers in mirrors. The Lodes House is a wild location. I think they're actually doing investigations and private tours for paranormal groups, I think, this winter. So, yeah, look them up on Facebook or on Google, Lodes House. All kinds of weird, wild activity in that place, and you won't be disappointed if you go. And even if you don't, just the history in that one house alone, it's amazing. And the architecture is built by a German immigrant who was a carpenter. It's beautiful. So today's episode, I wanted to go into, I love the Civil War. I love, the history here in Tennessee. Well, New England, man, I mentioned it, I think, a few episodes ago when I was up in Maine. New England, there's so much stuff, so much history to draw from. So I wanted to kind of go back into that and go to Boston. Let's do a show on Boston. So Boston, 1875. The South End is the height of Victorian propriety. Red brick row houses, gas lamps, and the towering steeple of the Warren Avenue Baptist Church. To the congregation, Thomas Piper was a quiet, reliable presence, the man who kept the fire stoked and the pews polished. But behind his honest face, Piper was a man who didn't just maintain the church. He used it as a hunting ground. Today we go inside the Belfry to discuss one of the most chilling cases of betrayal in New England history. This is the story of the Belfry murderer. So, to truly understand the monster Thomas Piper became, we have to travel back 2 years before the Belfry, to a desolate stretch of road in Dorchester. It's December 1873, the air is sharp enough to burn your lungs, and the sun has long since dipped below the horizon. Bridget Landrigan is a young woman simply trying to get home. She's walking along a path near the old Colony Railroad tracks, a shortcut many locals used. She's no reason to fear the shadow trailing her. That shadow is Thomas Piper. He isn't the sexton tonight. He's a hunter. Bridget was found the next morning. It wasn't just a murder. It was an execution. She'd been bludgeoned with a heavy wooden club. Her skull fractured with such force that the city's medical examiners were physically shaken. There was no robbery, no clear motive. In the eyes of the 1870s public, this was senseless violence, the work of a madman. But the police actually had their man within days. A witness had seen a tall man in a distinctive, quote-unquote, drab-colored or light overcoat sprinting away from the tracks. Through a series of tips, the investigators landed right on Thomas Piper's doorstep. They found the coat. It matched the description perfectly. They brought him in for questioning, sitting him down in a dimly lit room in the station, and this is where the truth, as it is, gets uncomfortable. Piper didn't sweat. He didn't stutter. He looked the detectives in the eye with a calm, almost bored demeanor. He told them he was a man of the cloth, or at least a man of the church. He provided a minute-by-minute alibi that placed him far away from Dorchester. The detectives looked at his clean hands, his polished shoes, and his respectable job at Warren Avenue Baptist, and they made a fatal assumption. A man who serves God couldn't possibly swing a club in the dark. So they let him walk. They handed him back his light-colored coat and sent him back to the pews. For the next 2 years, every time Piper pulled the bell rope at the church, he knew something the rest of Boston didn't. He had successfully looked at the law in the face and lied. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a killer who felt invincible. And that invincibility is exactly what would lead him to the Belfry in 1875. So May 23rd, 1875, a Sunday afternoon at the Warren Avenue Baptist Church, the service is ended, but 5-year-old Mabel Young is still there for Sunday school. Piper approaches Mabel with a simple offer. Want to see the view from the tower? He led the little girl up the winding, narrow staircase to the Belfry. And there, amongst the dust and the gears of the clock, he struck her with a cricket bat that he'd hidden there. When Mabel's aunt realized the girl was missing, a frantic search began. But Piper didn't run. In a display of sociopathic objectivity, he joined the search. He carried a lantern. He pointed the police towards the basement. He stayed close to the family, and he saw their grief firsthand, right up close. And eventually the searchers moved to the Belfry, but the trap door was locked. But Piper, well, he doesn't have a key. When the police finally decide they're going to break through, they find Mabel. She's still alive, but barely. She died shortly after, and she never was able to name her attacker. But she didn't have to. The cricket bat was found, and the only man with access to that locked tower, Thomas Piper. So once in custody, the church-going facade crumbled. Under intense interrogation, Piper didn't just admit to killing Mabel Young. He confessed to killing Bridget Landrigan, too. He also admitted to the assault of Mary Sullivan, another young woman who survived her encounter, but was left with permanent trauma. So in May 1876, Piper is led to the gallows at the Charles Street jail. It was a cold, clinical end for a man who had used the sanctity of a church to hide a monster. Today, the Warren Avenue Baptist Church is no longer a place of worship. If you walk by today, you'll see high-end luxury condos. The Belfry's still there, but it's part of a massive private residence. And people often ask if the site is haunted. And there's stories of cold spots in the upper floors. But the true ghost of Warren Avenue is not a spirit. It's a memory of how easily we can be fooled by someone who looks like they belong. So here's another one that I found in Boston. In 1874, the mothers of South Boston lived in a state of constant fear. Children were disappearing, not from the docks or the dark alleys, but from the sunny sidewalks where they were playing. The rumors were whispered on front porches. A quote-unquote boy fiend was on the loose. But when the police finally made an arrest, the city gasped. The monster wasn't a man. He was a 14-year-old boy named Jesse Pomeroy. He had a drooping eyelid and a distinctive white film over one eye that gave him a ghostly, predatory look. He looked like a victim of a playground fight, but he was actually the architect of Boston's greatest nightmare. We're going to check out the case of Jesse Pomeroy, the youngest serial killer in American history, and the boy who forced a city to contemplate the unthinkable, executing a child. So Jesse's story doesn't start with murder. It starts with a series of brutal warnings that the authorities completely ignored. In 1871, when Jesse was only 11, young boys in Chelsea began showing up at home with horrific stories. A boy with a white eye had lured them into the woods, tied them up, and tortured them with pins, knives, and even a belt. He didn't want their lunch money. He wanted to see them bleed. Jesse was eventually caught and sent to the state reform school at Westboro. And Jesse, he was a model prisoner. He was quiet. He was studious. And he was polite. The school officials, believing a child's heart could always be mended, they released him on probation after only 18 months. They sent him back to South Boston, right to the home of his mother, who ran a small dressmaking shop. It took less than a month for the boy fiend to strike again. Only this time, he wasn't interested in just watching them cry. March 1874, 10-year-old Katie Curran goes to Ruth Pomeroy's dress shop to buy a paper of pins, and she's never seen again. A few weeks later, the body of 4-year-old Horace Mullen is found in the Dorchester marshes. The brutality of the crime is so extreme that the police realize they aren't looking for a bad kid. They're looking for a killer. The investigation, it leads back to the Pomeroy shop. When the police search the basement, they find Katie Curran. She had been kidnapped. She was buried in a shallow grave right under the feet of the customers buying dresses. Jesse had killed her and hidden her over there while the city searched for months. The trial was a circus. Boston wasn't just angry. They were hysterical. The jury found Jesse guilty of murder in the first degree, which carried a mandatory death sentence. But here's the truth as it is. Massachusetts was a progressive state. They hadn't executed a child in decades. For 2 years, the governor refused to sign the death warrant. He couldn't bring himself to hang a 14-year-old. But the public, they just wouldn't let it go. They held rallies demanding Jesse's life for the lives he took. Finally, a compromise was reached. Jesse's sentence was commuted to life in solitary confinement. He's to be kept in a cell, alone, forever. No visitors, no light, no hope. And you'd think like that boy, he would just rot or go insane. But Jesse Pomeroy was different. He spent the next 41 years in solitary confinement. He taught himself 8 different languages. He studied law so intensely that he became a more capable attorney than the men who prosecuted him, constantly filing his own petitions for release. He was finally moved to the general population in 1917 and died 15 years later at the age of 72. And Jesse Pomeroy, he remains a dark stain on Boston's history. A reminder that evil doesn't always have gray hair and a deep voice. Sometimes it has a white eye and a schoolboy's cap. So, I mentioned the Civil War, and there are some ties from Boston to the Civil War. They didn't really fight there. They fought over in Pennsylvania, mostly in the South. But so in the middle of Boston Harbor, perched on the windswept George's Island, stands a massive pentagonal fortress of granite and earth. To a modern tourist, Fort Warren, it's a picturesque ruin. But in the 1860s, this was the bastion of the North. It was a place of isolation, salt, air, and for some, a final grim destination. Construction of Fort Warren began in 1833, spearheaded by Colonel Sylvanus Thayer, the father of West Point. It took nearly 20 years to complete, intended to be the ultimate defense for Boston shipping lanes. But as the Civil War erupted, its purpose shifted. It didn't fire any guns at invading ships. Instead, it became a cage for Confederate prisoners of war. Today, we're going to go behind those granite walls to explore the history of this prison and the legend of a woman that may or may not have ever left. Now, let's talk about the fortress itself. By the time the Civil War broke out in 1861, Fort Warren was one of the most formidable structures on the Atlantic coast. It was designed to house over 200 cannons, but its most famous contents were men. Because of its location, trapped by the freezing, treacherous waters of the harbor, it was considered nearly escape-proof. It housed high-profile Confederate figures, including James Mason and John Slidell, the men at the center of the famous Trent Affair, and even Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens. Life with the prisoners was a strange mix of hardship and odd civility. While the rank-and-file soldiers suffered in damp, crowded casemates, the high-ranking officers were allowed to walk the parade grounds under gentleman's parole. But even with those liberties, the isolation was crushing. The Atlantic wind whistled through the gun ports, and the Boston skyline sat on the horizon like a taunt. This brings us to the winter of 1862. Among the prisoners was a young Confederate officer named Andrew Lanier. Back home in the South, his wife Melanie was not a woman content to sit and wait for a prisoner exchange. Melanie Lanier reportedly traveled from the South all the way to Massachusetts. She disguised herself as a man, cutting her hair short and donning a soldier's uniform. Under the cover of a thick harbor fog, she rowed a small boat to George's Island. Armed with a small pistol and a map smuggled to her husband, she actually managed to make contact. She helped Andrew tunnel out of a cell and into a corridor. They were this close to the water, this close to freedom. But a Union guard spotted them. A struggle broke out in the dark, damp corridor. Melanie pulled her pistol to fire at the guard, but the weapon was old or perhaps damaged by the salty air. When she pulled the trigger, the gun didn't fire a bullet. It exploded. A piece of the heavy iron casing flew backward, striking Andrew in the head. He died instantly in her arms. Melanie was captured immediately. The Union military didn't see a grieving widow. They saw a spy and a traitor who had infiltrated a high-security federal installation. She was sentenced to hang. As her execution date approached, Melanie made one final haunting request. She refused to be hanged in the men's clothing she was wearing. She wanted to die with the dignity of a woman. The fort's commander searched the barracks, but they didn't have any dresses. Finally, someone found a heavy black hooded robe. Some say it was an old theater costume. Others say it was a chaplain's cloak. Well, anyway, she's led to the gallows in that black robe, the hood pulled low down over her face. As the trapdoor dropped, the legend was born. For over 150 years, the Lady in Black has been the most famous ghost in New England. Soldiers stationed at the fort during World War I and World War II reported seeing a hooded figure wandering the ramparts. Park rangers today tell stories of Corridor 4, the site of a tunnel where the air suddenly turns ice cold. There's also a sound of a woman sobbing that can be heard echoing off the granite. Whether you believe in ghosts or just the weight of history, Fort Warren stands as a monument to a war that split families apart. And if you ever take the ferry out to George's Island, keep your eyes on the dark archways. You might just see a shadow in a black robe, still waiting for a husband who never made it home. So yeah, thanks for sticking with me today, and also make sure you're following Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook and Instagram. Send me some questions. Also, don't forget to check out the books. You can find my books on Amazon. Various retailers have them. Yeah, just type in Southern Ghost Stories. You'll find me, or type in my name, Alan Searcy. Follow me on Twitter. Type in Alan Searcy. I'm up there. I post ghost stories on Twitter. Yeah, but I'll be back next week with more ghost stories, and I'll see you then. Check out the exclusive shirts from Monster City Madhouse, Gravestone, Rocktober, and Vile Halloween. All that and much more at MonsterCityMadhouse.com.